So the course is called Constructive Communication Systems, Facilitated Dialogue, Technology and Design. And what we really try to accomplish in this course is to focus on the art and science of designing and facilitating constructive communication spaces that can actually help communities to navigate diversity and experiment with the interplay between human and system dynamics. We built a lot of visual spaces with artifacts for the students. So a lot of our teaching was based on seeing things differently from a design perspective and bringing them into the space with different visual prompts and different activities that they could engage in. So we wanted to see what kind of materials and media we could use to engage all their senses and also support their learning activities.
We have them do reflections. Well, a lot of classes have been doing reflections in the past where they have students write something, maybe put it on the Canvas discussion board or something like this. But this idea that you can add a visual dimension to people doing that and then having the class be able to track that and look at that over time really requires you to use a different technology with you at the same time.
So there was always like a loop forming in our classes. We were starting with deconstructing the activity and the ask, and then at the end we were putting everything together, trying to close the learning loop, and we were always finishing with an asynchronous reflection session in which students were usually asked to challenge themselves to think about something that they used to think and something that they think now after all the learning that happened.
It's about designing an environment because you're in a really different space and paying attention to the aesthetic elements of it, the way the colors work, the way the graphics work and everything in order to have that space work for you, right? So part of what that suggestion going forward is not all of us, I can say even myself, have that skill set. So when you're moving into this kind of space, if you really want to accentuate and really use these more visual spaces and virtual spaces, people are going to need design support to do that, right? Really, when you're using these things like mural and stuff, you really need, that's what they're set up for. And for the more you have of that, kind of some design skills, someone who understands those aspects of things, the more effective it's going to be.
Well, it was important for us, when students entered such a space, not just to have to focus on the task, but also on the experience. As Ceasar mentioned, the colors that we use, different icons, the way the different steps of the activity were laid out. So all of these components, they added to the experience of an activity. It wasn't just a prompt, it wasn't just an ask for students to do, but we kind of focused on creating that as an experience for students to immerse in.
I think the tools are pretty simple. So I think it is the visual literacy, really understanding what does it mean to kind of use a visual tool for teaching.
So, make it fun, make it creative, make it easygoing, and make it enjoyable. This is what we try to accomplish, not make this another thing that they had to learn, but actually looking forward to being engaged in these processes.
The more conversant you are with it, then the more you can do. But even at the simple levels, just really understanding that you're communicating visually and what that means and what it can allow you to offset with what you're doing. If you're in the classroom with someone talking and you have these also visual space, the relationship between those two and what it can allow you to, what things you can move into that virtual that you were doing in the face-to-face, right? That you don't have to do because this other space can hold that piece for you. Bound the level of experimentation you're doing while in the class with some of these new tools, because it can get confusing for the students and for you. So I think we have to do that same thing as we move to this environment, because there's still some experimentation, is maybe bound the spaces in which your experimentation. So maybe your experimentation really happens in your reflection activities, or maybe it happens in your lecture activities, and you try a format and just let it stick for long enough to use, but not change a lot. I think that's something that, at least for me, was kind of a lesson going forward. And I think it's going to be a really interesting learning for strategy is how to use some of the robust tools that are virtual. So if you use mural boards and stuff like that, when you are actually in a face-to-face, right? How can they support what you're going to be doing later? How can they support the history of the class?
What I think is quite empowering in this virtual environment is that you can create virtual spaces for all the students to join. Sometimes when you're in the classroom, the student that may feel more confident in the language or in just speaking up their thoughts may just take more time and space in the classroom. But complementing the discussion during the class with these virtual spaces, I think it creates a more equitable classroom, because it provides to all the students the space to interact, the space to reflect, and to build on each other's ideas.
I think we learned a lot about what we can do when we're in a highly kind of virtual environment. We've already known a lot about what we can do when we're in this physical environment. And so now it's going to be some blending where we're going, I think, really recognizing the strengths that both of those offer.